Welcome to Leadership Development News, Profiles and Practice of Top Performers. I'm Dr. Relly Nadler, Dr. Kathy Greenberg, my esteemed co-host. We've been doing this since 2008 when it used to be called a radio show. Now we're a podcast. And so we got a lot of experience with this. And we always want to bring you great guests. We're going to talk with Joe Marabito. He has a book, The 100% Chance, that we're going to get into. We got some good questions that we'd like to pick his brain about. Why? We always want to give tips, tools that's going to help you be a top 10% performer. Why are we talking about top 10% performers? The idea of just getting into the top 10%, you're going to be more valuable to your team. You're going to be able to manage yourself a little bit more. You're going to be able to manage your team more. Well, how are you going to do it? And that's what we're trying to do, is help you get some of those tips and tools to do that. And between Kathy and I, we have helped thousands of leaders to perform in the top 10%. We both do executive coaching, leadership development, working with clients around culture. How do they be their best? And so we're really excited for you to hear today from Joe. And when we think about this, why is today so important for leaders? About 47% of leaders say that they're stressed. They have more anxiety. People are more angry. 75% of us say we need more support. Well, who do we need support from? It's the leader in your family. It's the parents. So we all need more support to navigate this. And then when we think about leaders in general and some of the key things that ideally they should be doing every day, is giving feedback. They should recognize good work. Well, these are somewhat of blind spots. When Gallup has done some research of recognizing good work, leaders say, oh, yeah, I do that almost 60% of the time. You ask their team, maybe 35%. Oh, I give feedback. I do that about 50% of the time. You ask their team, it's only 20%. Key behaviors that's going to allow you and your team to perform better. So these are the things that we're going to be focusing on. And Kathy, welcome to the show. And then we'll have you introduce Joe. I didn't realize, I know you were both at Accenture, but I didn't realize at the same time.
Well, thanks, really. We're in for a dynamic show today. For Joe and I, it's going to be a little bit of a walk down memory lane, but Joe will get a kick out of this. For the audience, I know you hear me say it all the time, but Joe hasn't heard me say this. So Relly and I have been together longer than any relationship I've had with any man. And so he wins the prize for being able to really have a long-term relationship with Kathy, which is saying a lot. And hats off to you, Relly. I understand that you just had a wedding at your house.
Yes. Thursday, we had a major wedding for my son, and all the anticipation. My daughter's here this weekend, and we went through what was the highlight for everybody. And my highlight was just this anticipation. Kat, you went through that, and Joe, I don't know if you have kids that were married, but all the excitement, all the dopamine that was getting there. And then I was I did the officiation, and that was really great. And then the other highlight, my son and daughter were working on their vows for about 3 or 4 days. And I'm thinking, what, pages and pages of that. And I was thinking, really, that's kind of long. You got to do all that? Anyway, it was beautiful. They both had very heartfelt vows. It was a great experience.
Well, hopefully we're going to have a great experience today talking about not only Joe's career, but an amazing book that he has put together called The 100% Chance: Leadership Insight Vision. And let me tell you a little bit about Joe. And this is really understating the truth. And we'll get into who Joe really is in the show, but I'm really privileged to know Joe for a very long time. He was a senior executive. He is a strategist and an advisor with extensive experience in healthcare and software. He's held multiple senior executive roles at large, very well-established companies, including Accenture, Express Scripts, and Elevance Health, as well as smaller, rapidly growing, privately held investor companies, including NaviNet, Advantasure, Ingenious Med, and HighRoads. And he is just an amazing mind. As a healthcare strategy partner at Accenture, he advised senior leaders in many of the largest healthcare organizations in the United States, and in some cases in the world. In CEO and COO and general manager roles, he successfully scaled and accelerated the growth of multiple businesses. He's currently working with a diverse range of clients to identify and assess emerging technologies and business opportunities, and to start up, manage, scale, turnaround, and grow enterprises. And Joe, it's just such an honor to welcome you to the show and to reconnect with you.
Thank you for having me on the show. It's an honor to be here, and I appreciate your time today and everything I've learned from you, Kathy, as well, working as a partner together at Accenture.
Well, it was a lot of learning together, and Joe and I have lots of stories about leadership that we can share during this program. But I think, Relly, you're going to really enjoy getting to know Joe.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and Kat, this is why we do this. I mean, we love connecting first with each other, and then people who can really bring some of these tips and tools, and that I can use. Not only our listeners, I'm going to learn from Joe, and I'm sure there's things that we can immediately apply. So, Joe, we always kind of start with this just to hear a little bit more about your background, and maybe when you think about some of the key influences in your life, who have they been?
Yeah, a bunch. Certainly my parents, who imbued values that I really didn't realize the importance of until, they were tested later in business. My high school physics teacher got me into engineering. He was a great teacher. He was also my basketball coach, and I still connect with him and seek advice for him. There was
Wow.
a there was a guy I worked with, when I was in college. I had a summer job at the Naval Air Development Center in Warminster, or worked for the Navy as a civilian, named Vince Catilli. Vince taught me an important lesson about experience. I was working on the reconnaissance pod for the F-14 and designing a camera mount for it. It was my first engineering assignment. I didn't even have an engineering degree, and I couldn't figure out the forces and how big to make the mounting fasteners. I spent a week trying to do it. And finally, I went to Vince and I said, Vince, how big should I make these fasteners? He didn't even look up from his desk, formed a circle with his thumb and his forefinger. I said, make them that big. And what that taught me was, look, ask somebody with experience first. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. My boss at Price Waterhouse was perhaps foolish enough to give me responsibilities that my experience really didn't warrant at the time, but that, taught me a lot. He was the first one who really trusted me to take on assignments, and was also the first person to really give me frank feedback. One day he sat me down and he says, Joe, you intimidate people. I said, what are you talking about? He said, you intimidate people. I said, you're going to have to explain more. He said, you get to the point too quickly and it scares people and then they don't want to talk to you. Okay. So just chill. So he changed my whole approach to consulting. Jim Hudak, my boss at Accenture, he trusted me to manage some pretty large client relationships. We had relationships with a lot of the major corporations in the United States, one of which I testified publicly on behalf of the firm. The firm didn't let me do that alone. I had a lot of help I didn't ask for, but I did have a lot of help with that. And then many of the CEOs and entrepreneurs I met, a lot of the entrepreneurs are just amazing people. The CEOs leading large corporations, I've learned a little bit from every one of them.
I'm sitting here smiling because, again, here's a crossroads for both of us, Joe. So my daughter currently lives in Warminster, and that base is still there.
Yes,
So
it's still there.
so
Yeah,
I go by that base all the time.
that's where I worked. Yeah.
Today we're going to talk a lot about your book, and I just want to I want to frame the book because we don't do video. Our show is principally audio. And for those of you who really enjoy a good leadership book with rich stories, this is a really easy read, and it's humorous. I mean, it makes you feel normal. The 100% chance I think, and Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, actually takes its title from one of the chapters, at least one that I enjoyed,
It
uh,
does.
about the fact that there's probably a 100% chance you're going to be wrong at some point in your career. And, do you have the courage to really step up to that? But what's really very unique about this book are the pictures, which are photographs that you started taking way back when. And you've always been attracted to photography. I remember going to your wedding, and at each place setting, there was a takeaway for every participant at the wedding, and it was a unique portrait. And you always do black and white photographs, a unique nature portrait for everyone in a beautiful little frame. And that was also our place seating. And I have to tell you, really, having just come off the heels of a wedding, right? What a beautiful way to thank people for being a witness to your life event, and to have that beautiful memoir. And I still have mine. And it's a beautiful black and white photograph. So this book is a unique and compelling look at leadership from both, uh, I want to say, a perspective of a very successful executive. Obviously, that's Joe and all the people he's worked with, and an eye for unique perspectives in nature. And I think for those of you who are readers, you're going to get a lot out of this book because it's very counterintuitive to put the two of them together. So, Joe, let's talk about that. You say many things are counterintuitive, such as questions are more important than answers to leaders, or your disdain for consensus. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, let's talk about questions first. I think human nature, is once you are posed a question, is to seek to answer the question. But my experience in leadership is that a lot of times the first question is malformed, and it arises from a symptom. Like somebody observes a symptom. How do we have a problem? How do we fix this problem? But I find it's almost always beneficial to question the question, because challenging the question leads to deeper scrutiny on a topic, and it challenges your assumptions. The answers to wrong questions are useless. It's like peeing in your pants. It makes you feel warm and fuzzy for a while, but then cold and wet after you figure out you've actually answered the wrong question. So it's really valuable to do. I had a client, the same thing happened. They called us up, our consulting firm, and said, our call wait times in the customer service center are way too long. Can you help our reps get through these calls faster? Okay, that's the question. How do we have our reps work faster based on long call wait times? And they had invented this incentive system that paid the reps based on the number of calls they took. And so I'm looking at this and I'm trying to figure out, I look at all the reps' performance and I see one rep is better than the other. So, well, maybe this is a best practices opportunity. So I sat with that rep and watched her for a day. And it turned out on that day, she dropped down to average and she did nothing unusual. And I went back and told the supervisor. She's like, "Oh, I know what's going on." Well, it turns out this rep was hanging up on customers in the middle of the call in order to boost her call count long enough to have the system record a call, but short enough so that she could get a bigger bonus. Well, this was totally counterproductive to the customer experience. Now you have an irate customer that's got to call back in. And I started looking at what they were doing, and it turned out that they weren't really focused on the service calls at all. They were being asked to do all this other stuff that was extraneous to the call. So the real question was, how do we best service members? And I went and totally changed their jobs. I fixed the problem of call wait times. But in the meantime, by answering the wrong question, they damaged their own reputation. They agonize customers, and not even for the reps that didn't hang up, but just rush people through the calls just to get to the next one. So it's a great example of sometimes you just need to question the question to get to what you really need to get to.
And that's so good, Joe, as coaches, and we got many leaders, who are trying to use a coach approach, is trying to get below the first thing someone says, and we also think about listening and you ask someone something, they only scratch the surface with their answer. And
Right.
so it may not be the full picture. And if you take that first thing, like you said, now you got an answer, but it's the wrong answer because we also may have had the wrong question.
Exactly.
So
So yeah, go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Kat.
No, you go ahead.
But we're going to take a break in a moment. But the other thing I'm very interested in hearing about is the disdain for consensus. And maybe we'll just say a word about this. I see all the time how hard it is to get consensus.
It's
You're
not
with,
really, it's not
right?
hard. It's impossible. I mean, if you have an organization of any size, it's impossible to get consensus.
Yes.
And my question is, why do you need it? Inside well-run organizations, there isn't consensus. I mean, why don't companies have 8 co-CEOs, 8 being a typical size for a senior management team? Well, somebody's got to decide.
Yeah.
Somebody's got to make the decision. It's not up to a committee. There's an individual. And so I find if you try to get consensus, there will always be somebody who holds out, right? Because they now have power over the decision and they want to get something for it, some concessions, some recognition, whatever it is. And it just stifles progress and it stifles innovation. And I just can't stand organizations like this. So the way my senior team meetings work is, get input from everybody, have a robust discussion, and then I'll say, okay, great, this is a good discussion. This is what we're going to do. Bob, I need you to do this. Shelley, I need you to do this. And then we go do it, right? We realize that we're not going to agree with every decision, but somebody's got to decide. I dealt with one of these organizations once when I was running a company and I was responsible for M&A, and I wanted to buy a competitor's business that was in our space, but we actually had a better position. So I talked to the CEO, went through some negotiations. We agreed that he would sell us his business in this one part of his business. And then a week later, he called me up and he said, well, somebody on my team vetoed the decision. I said, what? Well, we're a consensus organization and everyone has to agree. So I was just flabbergasted. How do you run your business this way? So we didn't do the deal. We entered the market and directly competed with him, took 80% of his business. And then 2 years later, he calls me back and he says, well, I'm ready to do the deal now. I said, we don't need to. It's done. It's already done. It just stifles innovation. It's a bugaboo of mine. I just I don't work well in consensus organizations. I mean, you need people to support you, but that's
Right.
different.
Yeah,
So
well,
let me just,
I was just gonna say I'm taking consensus right here. We're going to a break, but we'll be right back. So don't go away. You're listening to Leadership Development News. That's consensus for you.
Welcome back to Leadership Development News, profiles and practice of top performers. We're talking with a top performer, Joe Marabito. His website or his contact is JV Marabito, Marabito @gmail.com. And Joe, we were just talking about especially consensus, um, versus the leader taking over it. And I think, like you said it, why are so many companies dysfunctional? Because it's tough to get everybody in alignment. And I think just the idea of which we talk about leadership styles. So in this decision, which style? Is it a tell? Is it a sell? Is it a test? Here's my idea. What do you think? Or the consensus, that's kind of consult. Or is it a co-create? And I think leaders have usually one, the culture has one. You need all of them. And exactly like you said, okay, I got everybody's input. Here's what we're doing. It's brain friendly. And I think when you're trying to get consensus and everything, it can be exhausting. It is not brain friendly because it's almost impossible to get consensus.
Yeah, I completely agree. I also think there are different styles that are appropriate for different situations, right? If your company is losing money, running out of cash, you need to resort to a tell, right? This is what we're going to do. It's like we're being attacked. We need to defend ourselves. This is what we need to do. But if you run your organization that way the whole time, you lose
Yeah.
people emotionally, right? So I find, even when I need to make a decision and it might be a controversial decision, I want people to know why, right? I want them to know that it's been thought out, that yeah, there's risk, but this is why we're going to do what we're going to do. And if it doesn't work out, we're going to change. So people can at least say, okay, he heard me, he understands, he gets it. He might be wrong, but listen, I'm willing to give it a try and go down that path, because you can't just run over people, at least long term. Sometimes you have to in the short term, but you need them, right? You need them more than they need you, because they're the people that are going to get it done.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I really did pour through some of these stories, and they made me laugh. And I thought I was the only person that called a utility company and said, you're going to have to come when I'm available, not when you're available.
Right.
And you held out for probably about 10 phone calls, I think.
Wow,
Until
yeah.
you got somebody who said, I'm going to come out and work on a problem you had. I'm curious, in your experience, what distinguishes great leaders from not so great leaders? And I think some of us who are on the great leader axis are just diligent. I mean, we're just not going to succumb to the silliness.
Yeah, certainly. Perseverance is a trait of a great leader because you meet failure all the time. My experience is people don't march into my office and say, "Hey, something great happened today. Here it is." No, it's usually, we got a problem and no one else here can solve it. Here, you solve it. And so you get the hardest problems that no one else has solved, and they're pretty bad by the time they reach your desk. So I think certainly, the stick-to-itiveness and the perseverance is part of it. And you see it more in entrepreneurs, that have formed their own companies and they failed for years and they finally succeed. And I really admire them for that. But this is a totally unscientific observation, right? Because I haven't done any studies on this. It's just from the CEOs and other leaders I've met. But I think the ones that are the great ones have a learning mindset. They really seek to understand. They're more listeners than they are tellers. They're intellectually honest. They're not afraid to call out their weaknesses and poke fun at themselves. They're critical thinkers. They tend to make decisions based on facts, not hopes or hunches. They're people that can connect what other people might not be able to connect, like disparate ideas. Well, I didn't think those went together, like leadership and images, right? Well, how do they go together, and why does it work? they can quickly home in on the central issues. They can say, well, let's not talk about this. Let's talk about this and get the discussion on the right page. They're courageous. They're unafraid to act. They act without undue delay, and they can connect with and inspire people, perhaps most importantly. People want to work for people they believe in, they trust, and that inspire them. They're more compelling. They tend to be articulate. They're driven by achievement, not ego. They put the interest of the organization before their own interest. They're focused on purpose rather than things like compensation. I I know of one CEO whose board calls him coin operated because every time something good happens, he asks for a raise. I had to laugh at that. I thought that was funny. The good leaders, great leaders are approachable. They understand themselves. They're relationship oriented. The not so great leaders tend to be transactionally oriented. They tend to be formulaic. Well, this worked for me, in my last job, so it'll work for me in the current job. Well, every situation is different. You have to apply your learnings intelligently, just not blindly. They tend to be less introspective. They tend to view themselves more as tellers, less as listeners. They tend to be more top-down decision makers. They tend to be less emotionally adept. They don't see the signals as well. Like, this discussion isn't going very well. You may not hear it, but it's not going very well. And they tend to surround themselves with order takers rather than people that challenge them. The great leaders find the best people they can find and try to keep them, and people that challenge them. I have an interesting story. I met with, I probably shouldn't say his name, the CEO of one of the biggest health plans in the US, was with Accenture at the time. We had a big relationship with them. We had several projects going on, quite large projects. And there was a meeting with the CEO. Joe, we're meeting with the CEO. We need you there because I was a strategy consultant. So I'm there with two partners, both senior to me, and the CEO wanted to get feedback on his proposed strategy. So he articulated his strategy and said, what do you think? I defer to the senior guy. The senior guy says, I think it's right on the mark. You got it nailed. He asked the other guy, it's right on the mark. He asked me, what do you think? I said, you got it wrong. And my partners looked at me and they had this 2 seconds of horror and shock. Like, did you just screw this up, Marabito? It is. You're not going to have a job tomorrow. So the CEO looks at me, he smiles, he folds his arms, he sits back in his chair, he says, great, let's talk about it. This is a great leader, right? This is somebody who put himself out there with this idea and he's seeking feedback. Now, we had a 30-minute meeting scheduled. It went for 90 minutes. And we went round and round about his strategy. And he didn't agree with everything he said, but that's okay. He got the discussion he needed out of that interchange. That was a great leader.
So, Joe, that point, I just want to echo that because I think everybody is complying to the leader. So how does a leader get people to challenge them? I know they can say, oh, you can challenge me. Oh, I want to hear your ideas. But the first thing out of their mouth, if it has a tone or if it says, well, tell me why, so how do you coach them to really hear idea or to, have people disagree with them? Because it goes back to what you're saying about consensus, and it goes back to people feeling like it's not just talk, but they really want to hear that kind of feedback. Like, what would someone have to do to instill that?
Well, you have to make it safe, right? You can't punish anybody for it because once you do that, you'll never hear anybody say anything again. The one thing I do is I never start a decision-making discussion by stating my point of view, right? Because if you stated at the beginning, there's no discussion. Why, if he's already made up his mind, why are we debating, right? So I usually start with questions, the questions that are in my head, and get ask for people's perspective, and then listen to those and debate those and discuss them. The other thing I find really helps is humor, right? Because if you're just serious all the time, right? If you can't laugh at yourself, especially self-effacing humor. If I make fun of myself in front of my whole team, then they say, well, he's a human. He's not a machine. He's a human, and he understands what he's not good at, and he understands what we're not good at too. So it's got to become a safe place to have, to have a discussion and I mean, I surround myself with the best people I can find. I want to know what they think, because you can't do it alone, and you can't know everything. I've never
Right.
reached the 100% accuracy level in my decision making. I need help.
Right.
And if you're authentic like that, people will open up to you. And not only that, they'll keep working for you. You go somewhere else. This has happened to me all the time. People call me, you have a role for me? I want to come work for you. They want to keep going.
Joe, when you and I were in this day in and day out, um, there was a bit of an inside joke, and I'm sure those of you who are in the consulting world have come across this at some point in your career. And I'm going to say this with great love and compassion for the everyday organization that doesn't see its own foibles. But we used to say to a lot of the people that we worked with who were residents in that culture of that company, look, if you guys were doing your job the way it was intended, we wouldn't be here. And we would say it with great respect. We wanted to make sure that he felt included. But a lot of that comes from something you call the law of inertia. And companies get real comfortable doing the same thing the same way for a very long time. And as you say in the book, the hectic life of a leader drives a short-term reactionary mindset. So tell us a little bit about this reference to Newton's first law
Yeah,
of inertia.
Newton's first law. For those of you that forgot your high school science, Newton's first law says that an object in motion or at rest will remain that way until acted on by an external force.
Mhm.
And people think I'm crazy for including Newton's first law in my book, but organizations are the same way as it relates to how they do things, as it relates to processes, but also ideas and assumptions, about the business. And I learned a lot of this in the software business. So when you build a piece of software, you say, okay, what does it need to do today? And what do we think it needs to do tomorrow? And you architect it for that. And then things change, right? Regulations change, competitors come into the market, customers ask for changes. And so you have all these incremental changes that happen to processes over time that you hadn't planned for and didn't envision. And after 5 years, the software architecture no longer serves the functional purpose of the software. So what do? You re-architect it, right? So time frame depends on the industry and the market and how expensive it is to replace. But the point is, you need to re-architect things periodically. And in a lot of organizations, there's nobody looking at that. There's
Like
nobody.
the FAA, right?
Yes, that's
Yeah.
right. That's right. So we need to fix the communication lines in case the primary one goes down, right? So there's nobody looking at it. So these processes just sit there and they exist. And I'd go I was working with you, Kathy, we'd walk into a problem. Why do you do it this way? Well, we've always done it this way. Well, okay, now I know this is a bad answer. This is an opportunity. There's something we can improve. There's something we can improve here when there's the answer, because that tells me they haven't thought about why they do it the way they do it. And so it makes sense to periodically take a look at these processes and go in and do some surgery on them. It happened in the last company I ran, Ingenious Med in Atlanta. We made an application that doctors used in hospitals to record what they did. Well, we would hire Georgia Tech grads to code our software in the US, in Atlanta, and we had the most expensive development model possible to man, right? So our development was pretty expensive. So I went to our CIO and I said, we need to find a better way to do this. And so we started thinking about ways that we can do it. We started working together, came up with a way to reduce our development costs by 75% and increasing our accuracy at the same time without offshoring a single job. That was only because somebody said, let's take a look at this. The same company, I asked our head of software implementation, she implemented our software at customers, and I said, it takes too long. And people aren't buying because it takes too long, and we charge them too much for it. Make it better. She went and reduced our software implementation cost by 40%, and the time it took by a third. People started buying more from us from that, just because somebody asked the question, let's rethink this process. It worked well 10 years ago, but hey, it's now. So let's see what we can do to fix it.
Joe, these are great. If we want to come back, we're going to take our next break. But when we come back, I want to hear a little bit more about the book and maybe some of the pictures that's in there, because like Kathy said, it is, quite unusual. And maybe as we're thinking about this, kind of why these pictures and your kind of philosophy behind putting that together.
Sure.
All right. You're listening to Leadership Development News. Come right back.
Welcome back to Leadership Development News. We're having a delightful conversation with the author of 100% Chance, Joe Marabito. And Joe, one of the little chapters in the book is called Irrational Behavior is Bunk. And I just want to remind you of a story and end with a question here about the role of leadership. So I don't know if you remember this, but we were testing a product at a major healthcare organization. And we were really up against a deadline. And we were doing the death march to get this done. And we didn't have enough people to test the system. And so yours truly here said, well, I live downtown here. It's just a walk from this building to my condo. I'll stay here as long as we need to and test the system. So I'm sitting there testing the system, and it turns out it's like the next day already. I was there all night. And the client walks in, and she was amazing. And she still is. She's an amazing woman. She's still a friend. And she comes over and she says, "What are you doing? Why are you here?" And I said, "Oh, I've been testing the system." And one of the other people on the team came up and said, "Yeah, she's killed about 5 clients." And I said, "What?" And it turned out that whatever I was doing system, the software correctly, but the unfortunate message that came up in the system was that the client was deceased. So we found a bug in the system by the fact that my irrational behavior to sit there and test the software with no prior experience actually worked. And so Does intuition have a role here in leadership?
Yeah. It certainly does have a role in leadership, and but in software, if there's a way to break your software, customers will find it, and they'll usually find it in the first week. And you really established your reputation that day, Kathy, because here's a senior partner, PhD, Dr. Greenberg doing frontline testing on our software. That made an impression on everybody and really helped the team. Um, Intuition is absolutely essential, and you, especially for the minor decisions, right, where you don't have time to research something or get the data, or you need the feel for the situation. But here's the catch, right? Intuition is a little like prescription drugs, and that they have an expiration date. And and if you let the intuition go too long without being reinformed, it ages and it doesn't serve you very well, because you build up these assumptions. The assumptions should change over time, but if you're missing the signals to change them, your intuition will be wrong. And so there's sort of two sides to it. I don't like leaders that only decide on intuition,
Right.
because they're not building your intuition is only good because you inform it, and you need to keep informing it, and you need to keep learning. If you stop learning, your intuition becomes obsolete slowly over time, but it becomes obsolete and you end up making bad decisions. And I think some people lean on intuition because they don't want to do the work, right? To investigate, what the heck is going on. It happened in a company I joined. I joined a company, and we needed to accelerate our sales. So I said, "What's our win rate?" Well, our win rate's 70%. Okay, great. And so they had their salespeople out chasing. This was the intuition. They had chasing new deals. And so I looked at the win rate and I said, "Well, what is it for new deals and what is it for existing deals?" Well, for existing deals, customers that knew us and loved us, it was 90%. But for new deals, it was 20%. Like, okay, so we have this big customer here that loves us and has a lot more we could sell to, but we're not selling to them. We're selling to this little guy over here who's saying no. So I switched. The intuition was wrong. So I switched, we build new intuitions. We sell well to existing customers. Let's focus on existing customers. Guess what happened? Our pipeline increased by 4 times, and our sales doubled when we started selling to people that already loved us. It wasn't this, you didn't need to go to business school to kind of, but you did need to update your
Right.
intuition to get to that point.
That's beautiful. I love what Kahneman says about intuition, to recognize pattern. But what you're saying, it can't be the same pattern as before. So you got to infuse it with new information. And then, how does that change?
You have to invest in it.
So say a little bit about the pictures in the book. We want to encourage people to get the book, and then we'll get into some more of the leadership issues.
Yeah, so a lot of people ask me why I included photographs in the book, for a few reasons. One is a visual image can communicate feelings that words can't describe. So what I tried to do was match images with the feeling I had when I'm on a certain subject, right? So if I'm on, a fuzzy situation, you don't see it very clearly yet, I put an image in there of a tree blowing in the wind and with a long exposure, so the branches were fuzzy. So I think it can add something to the text, enhance the text by communicating feelings. Secondly, I love photography. I've been doing it since high school, and it's been a part of my journey, and I think it's made me a better journey because it's sparked my creativity and innovation, my critical thinking, problem solving, communicating a vision. I, I do mainly black and white film photography, and so how do you take a color image in 3D and translate it to the feeling I get when I'm standing in this field looking at a mountain, on a two-dimensional black and white image? Well, you have to do the same thing in a business. Okay, we're here. I need to describe where we need to go, and I need to do that articulately so people get it. So there's a lot of paragraphs. Your book, Emotional Brilliance, suggest a connection between nature and emotional awareness. And that's kind of what it's
Right.
done for me. I think of it as cross training, but cross training for the brain, right?
Mhm.
Because if you play golf and just golf and not tennis and
Right.
football, then you develop an imbalance in your muscles and your neural reactions. But if you diversify, you become a better performer in all those
Yeah.
sports. And I think there's a link between art and leadership. You
Oh,
guys
definitely.
are behavioral experts, though, so I'm doing this
But,
from
I,
experience. You probably
but
know more about it than I
I think
do.
I think there is that, and that's why just around emotional regulation and emotional brilliance, some of it is what nature can do for us. And that's why you commented on my background. I mean, if I'm on Zoom or Teams all day, I want to have something that feels encouraging and breathing life into me. And so if I think for our listeners, your background, if you're looking to emotionally regulate yourself, what's in your office? Or are you getting outside? What are you looking at? Those, just like you say, Joe, are so important.
Yeah. I have an interesting observation. So a lot of people have the book, and when people talk to me about it, the first thing they say is, "I like the images." Now, I don't know how to take that. Like, if it's a favorable commentary on the images or an unfavorable commentary on the text, or that they just haven't gotten to the text yet. But it's the first thing they react to. So people are drawn to photographs, and it just makes it more interesting. It gives it a different dimension.
Well, I think what's surprising for me is also if you look at the author biography, which is really, it's very innovative. Joe not only tells you who he is, but when he picked up his first camera, when he created his first darkroom in his parents' house, once without running water, and then once as an adult with running water. And he also talks about some things that he doesn't include in his bio, like winning uh, the black and white um, position. I mean, that's pretty powerful to be in Black and White magazine, and also to be a speaker and a presenter at the Delaware Valley University's Professional Artist Lecture Series. I think what this shows us, just like music, is a key character trait of leadership. That art, in a function of any art, um, is a creative component which resonates with all kinds of leadership qualities, whether it's observation, the power of creativity. There's lots of things here that give us some insight into the mind of good and great leaders. Let me ask you one more question here, and that is, why do you think leaders need a good kick in the pants? Have always said, if you don't fail by the time you're 40 and get your life handed to you on a plate, you're not successful. I don't care who you are.
Yes, failures are definitely more instructive than successes. And I don't, I just, I'm so grateful for the people that have given me authentic feedback and unvarnished feedback, because those are the moments where you say, I get it. I need to work on this, or I need to change it. I think, but what happens as you succeed and you become the expert in a field or a expert in the field, then uh, you stop getting it over time, right? There's unless you seek it out, and then at some point you start reporting to a group of people, a board, right? Not an individual. So there's no one there to kick your pants, right? So you either need to be really introspective and do it yourself, or you need to seek it out because it's still valuable. There's still stuff you can learn. There's still stuff you can get better at, or you have blind spots and you can't see the blind spots. You need somebody to kick you in the pants once in a while. It's a healthy thing.
Yeah.
And I don't mean it in a mean sort of way, but I've had some of my staff come up to me and say, "Hey, Joe, you need to think about this." And then I know it's time to listen, right? Because okay, he's trying to say this as gently as possible, but I say, okay, got it. I either need to find somebody who can do it for me, or I need to fix the way I do it. It's harder and harder to get, though, as you get older, because who's going to teach you?
Right. And that's where the value, Joe, for us, and Kathy and I, I'm sure you and the people who may be listening, of having a coach where you can get off autopilot. So like I like to say, if you stay on autopilot, you stay average. Well, unfortunately, we're all on autopilot, therefore we're all average and trying to get better. And so just having that kind of thinking time, reflection time, that someone can challenge you with something, like you're saying, ask the second and third question about why you're doing that are so important. And so say a little bit more about, I think it's the chapter Kathy said about, 100% chance. Is it about being wrong? And like, what can people do for
Yeah.
that?
So, really interesting experience. I worked for Texas Instruments out of undergraduate school, and I worked in the defense group. And so we made the radar that went on the Eurofighter at the time. And there was a group in there called reliability engineering, which I didn't understand until I got there. And so I started asking them, what do you guys do? And they said, well, we calculate the mean time between failure. Well, what's that? That's the average time everything works right. And so if you have something that has a 99% reliability, say for a mission, and you string 10 of them together, there's a 90% chance everything will work fine. But if you have 100, that number goes down to like 67%. And if there's 1,000, there's only a 0.04% chance that nothing will fail on that mission. So you need to understand that when you're planning for something, when you're planning, enter a new market, you're doing your financial plan, there are all these assumptions and estimates that you rely on. And the tendency is to plan for the happy path. Well, we're going to sell 30% growth and we're going to get these profits. And well, if everything goes as planned, just like that radar, something isn't gonna hold up. Something's gonna fail. And so leadership isn't about being correct in your forecasts and your projections. It's about figuring out what to do when you're wrong, because there's 100% chance you're going to be wrong about every one of those things. One of those assumptions and every part of your plan is going to be wrong, because it's impossible to be right about it. And the challenging situation is when someone is just dogmatic about it, says, no, we're still gonna do this, without taking a realistic look at it and say, really, can we still do it? What do we need to change? So it's a lesson in agility, right? And the lesson is you need to figure out as fast as you can what's wrong with what you messed up in your assumptions, because that makes a great leader. It's
Right.
to do something about it. It's the challenge is not recognizing what goes wrong soon enough, because you're gonna be wrong.
Yeah.
And face it, it's just dealing with it is the where the art is in leadership.
Well, we've come to the end of our show today. And I know that there's so much more that we could talk to you about, Joe, but I want to read the last line in your book. You say, throw yourself into your next role with the same determination and stick-to-itiveness as your first role, and go kick some butt.
Right. Yeah, it's a good way to end.
All right, Joe. Well, thank you so much. Really great to get to meet you, and we encourage people to go get your book, 100% Chance, and JV Marabito at Gmail. What's your website in case someone wants to
Yeah,
go
so
to it?
you can get the book on the website brilliantadditions.com. That's brilliant-additions.com. BRILLIANT-EDITIONS.com. Brilliantadditions.com is the best way to get the book.
Right.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Joe. We're going to sign off. Great having you.
Great to be here. Thank you.